So yeah, hey everyone, thank you for coming here today. Like my intro said, I don't really like to do slides, so this is going to be a live demonstration on a nightly build of the IDE. So in case something goes wrong, I can blame that. It's not me, for sure. So before we start, how many of you are Go developers? Can you raise your hand a bit? I'm going to try to be closer to here. Okay, a few of you. How many of you are using the IDE from JetBrains, GoLand? Okay, cool. I hope I'm going to teach you something. If not, tell me afterwards. Right, so a few details about me. So I'm a developer advocate for JetBrains. You can find me on Twitter at DLSniper. That's my email address, and you can find me on Gopher's Slack. If you don't know about it, that's the address where you can get an invite. And there's like 33,000 people that you can ask for help and so on and so forth. And that's kind of it. Let's jump into the talk. So before I actually show you anything about the editor and so on, I want to show you a tiny little program that we have. It's called the JetBrains Toolbox. And you can see it here. And with this toolbox, which you can download for free and so on, you can manage your IDE installation. And as you can see, I have already 3 versions of the IDE available. One of them is the stable one, and the other 2 are the actual EAP builds, so the beta builds if you want, plus the nightly one. So in case you're like me and you like to live on the edge. And you can see all our other editors as well. So for example, if I want to install the C editor, I can just come here and install. And if I press install, it's going to install the latest table. But if I press on the arrow, I can see all the other versions available. So I can see, for example, that we have, let's say, the previous versions available in case you want to revert to a previous one. So if you want to, let's say, test the next version of the editor, you can come here and install it. And it's also going to help you manage your projects. So if you lose your projects or you want to keep track of them easier, you have a list of all the projects that you open and you can search them quickly here. So once you install an IDE, you can also you also have like a few other options, such as staying on the current version, the current major version at least, installing automatically the updates so that you don't have to keep track of them and so on, and choosing other properties such as which version to install. For example, this one is on nightly, but you can also choose to install EAPs or just the release versions. So that's, let's say, the toolbox. Let's jump in the IDE now. So first and foremost, let's say we want to write a program, and that program needs some completion options, right? So we need to start writing something for that. You'll see during the presentation, there's like the shortcuts appearing here that I'm pressing, and that's a plugin for the IDE. We'll get that. We'll get there as well. And for example, now I'm in the mode that's called the presentation mode. Otherwise, my editor looks like this usually. I can also use the find action shortcut to do something like color scheme. So now I'm using Darkla, which is my default theme, but let's say that's not really great for presentations. So I'm going to change to the default one. And now you can actually see something, hopefully, and read from the screen. As well as, let's go back to find action. And let's say I want to enter the presentation mode. So that's how you can quickly switch between view modes and color themes and so on. Normally the presentation mode is somewhere here in, give me a second, in view, but because I don't have enough screen space to actually show you where the presentation mode is, yeah, that's why it's easier to keep in mind your find action shortcut, which you can find here. It's under help, find action, so you can always find it here. Another thing that probably is useful is, let's say if you do pair programming, you see the plugin that keeps jumping there. It's called the presentation assistant. And it's not shipped by default, but you can install it, and that's it. Restart the IDE, and you have all the shortcuts appearing there. Okay, so I thought let's jump into doing some editing. So I have a file here called tplgo HTML, which is a HTML template using the standard HTML template version. Right, so we color it like this and so on, and you can see we also have some users, some ID, and so on. So let's try to do something useful with it. Let's try to render it, right? So to do that, we would do something like this. First, we would need to somehow read the template, right? So to read the template, let's say we do something like T. Well, actually, let's do even better. So I want to read a file. To read a file, I just need to start typing read file without having to remember if it's in IO util, IO, OS, and so on. And the IDE will tell me automatically, hey, you have two versions of this. It's one in IO util and the other one in syscall. Which one do you want? So I have the documentation already showing up, and I can read the documentation, right? So I have that option here, and if I switch to the other one, I have, well, nobody bothered to actually write the documentation for read file in syscall, so no documentation there. We also have an example, so let's jump quickly to the example. And if you noticed, I clicked on a link, and the example opened up here. What you don't see, because I'm in presentation mode, it's that this example right here, and I hope you can actually see it, if not, come forward. It's in a Scratch file. So what the IDE did for us was to take the contents of the example that someone actually wrote and put them in a file that we can now run. So if we want to quickly inspect a function, we can write an example for it, and then the IDE is smart enough to go and create a file on its own, put the example there, and let us work with it. So that's a good incentive for you to go home to your work and start writing example functions, especially for those, let's say, harder functions that are not really intuitive to test out and so on. Okay, so back to our source code. We go here. So read file, I said. Okay, IOTL, read file, and this one is called tpl.go.html, right? Okay. So now I need to do something with it, but you also see that we have a hint here which says, well, unhandled error, right? So the IDE now recognizes in the latest version, in 2018.3, it will recognize unhandled errors. So I know from the function signature that we have here, it returns a slice of bytes and an error, right? So the way to do this would be, let's say, we use the postfix completions, and we use the var postfix completion to quickly get access to, to create the variables and so on. And let's say I want this to be named T, and I want this to be named R, because I like them like that. Right. Oops. I actually forgot to press T. Okay, so now let's handle the error, because we are in Go, and I can say error.rr, or there are other options as well. So in this case, the RR postfix completion will just say, okay, return. And because we are in the main function, which doesn't return any parameters, there's nothing to return, right? So I can just say something like fatal error. So again, I haven't had the need to do any special importing and so on, and because there's only one package containing the fatal line method or function in this case, I imported that automatically. Right, so now let's put this to use. So we say something like TP, actually let's go template, new, let's give it a name, demo, very good name, right? And then parse. So we are parsing the template now, and we are handling the return values as well. So TPL error, and let's say RR again. Okay, so I should probably not type this again, but what we can do, for example, is go here to settings, editor, live templates, go, and then say something like, okay, I want a new live template in this group because I've looked at all the live templates that we have, right? And oh, okay, actually there is error, right? So someone defined it already for me. Can I edit this one? And the answer is yes, I can edit this one. So I can do something like this. I can change the template here, right? And I can say $err here. And my cursor will be wherever end is. So let's do this the other way around. I type err. Now I can choose the live template, not the variable. So as you can see, we do a distinction between the variable, it has a clear icon, the interface, which again has a different icon, and the actual live template, which we can see how it looks like. Right, so we do this, and we say, yes, I definitely want to handle that one. Right, so the next step would be tpl.execute, right? I want this to SD out, and I want to pass in some data, right, which we don't have yet. And again, I want to handle the error, but in this case, I just want to handle it in a quick way. I'm going to use the postfix completion, and I'm going to say fatal line error. Right, so it's almost there. We just need some data in it. So let's put some dummy data. I can use the quick fix shortcut, which is Alt-Enter, and I have some options there. I can create a variable, constant, or the global ones, which means I can put them in the package level. Let's create one that's inside the function. And now the IDE will, well, it's going to try to suggest everything that it can, but let's not choose what this IDE wants. Let's create some new data types. So let's say I have a render type, and I want to have some data here. So users, it's going to be users here. And I have, if I remember correctly, right, so I have title there in the title of the file. So I should probably go back to the recent edited files, which is a shortcut as well. In my case, it's Control-Shift-E, or I guess on OS X, it's Command-Shift-E. So you can go to recent edit files, and you can see a list of files that you've recently edited. So in case you're running with multiple tabs and so on, you can quickly jump between files. And like, for example, if I want to go to a Docker file, I could just start typing doc, and completion works here as well, or in this case, typing. Typing works kind of everywhere in the IDE, and if you find a place where it doesn't yet, raise a flag and we'll fix it. So the idea is try not to use the mouse or the touchpad as I do right now, but this is a demo, so I'm allowed to do that. So don't use the mouse at all. You can keep your hands on the keyboard at all times. And I have title, as I said. So title, and let's say demo here. Right, so I have a few undefined types. First, let's create a type. So it's a struct. Okay, that's good. And we are still working on inferring the fields when you create the structure. But so for now, you would have to go manually under each field and say, oh, So from the place where I use the structure, I can say Alt Enter, create a field, and then, well, it's going to create a field, and it's going to try to infer the type for it automatically as well. Because users doesn't exist as a variable yet, it's going to use the interface type. So let's say this one is a slice of type user. So again, I'm going to create the type user. The ID doesn't know in this particular case what the type user is, right? So it's going to allow me to define the type. Let's say we have an ID, which is an integer, and we have a first name, string, and a job, which is a string as well. So I can format the file using a built-in formatter, and there's something else that you haven't seen me doing all while editing the broken source code. I haven't saved the file that much because there's no need to save the file. The IDE works without having for you to press Control Save every time you need to do something. So I've created this one, I have the type and so on, but there's one more error. So if I look here under the syntax analysis, you'll see that there are some errors and, well, some typos. We don't really care about the typos. We can fix those quickly, so I can save this one and so on. But I want to, let's say I was with the cursor here, right? So I want to see where the error is in the file. Well, I can press the F2 shortcut, and then I can jump to the next error. So by just pressing F2, I can cycle between errors in the file and go to the nearest one as well. So this one says, well, convert to string because it says cannot use T type slice of bytes as a string, right? So the IDE knows that, okay, type of slices of bytes can be converted to strings. So let's say we do the conversion. And the IDE does that for you. And in this case, we need to actually create a variable, and it's going to be a slice of user. And let's say we do something like this. ID is 1. Well, I don't know the fields, right? So I remember just the ID. One way to solve this would be for me to actually, well, jump to definition, right? So click here, jump to the definition, which is Control B or Command B. But I don't want to do that often because it breaks the editing cycle that I have, right? So I don't want to switch contexts and so on. Plus, if I want to go back, now I'm using the type in 2 places. So where should I go back? Do I know in which file was I when I did this? No, because, well, I don't have the file name in front of me. So how do I do this? Well, I can invoke Alt-Enter inside the structure itself, the value, and I can say fill or fill recursively. We don't have anything that's recursive, so we don't have any embedded structures or fields that are of type structure, let's say. So I'm going to choose fill, and I have all the fields automatically added for me. So now I can have a look at what the fields are, and I can start to prototype, continue prototyping, right? So I say Florin, so looks right, and well, now I could run this, right? So theoretically everything is green except for the typo that I have here. Sorry. And I'm going to save this one. So everything is green. There's no more F2 jumping anywhere, so everything is fine. So I have a run configuration defined from earlier. It's called, the IDE uses, if you go to run edit configurations, we use something called run configurations. You could add one using the plus button and say, in this case, go build. There are others as well. I'm going to show you a couple of them a bit later. And in this case, I just defined a kind package because I don't want to have to deal with the, let's say if I add a new Go file, I would need to add a Go file to the output of the build command and so on and so forth. So I don't want to do that. I'm just going to build a package, and it's always going to build that for me. I want to run in the actual directory. And kind of that's it. That's the configuration. There's not much to do. I also can share it with someone else using the IDE as well if I want to. There's a file that is going to be placed inside the directory of the project, and that's going to be shareable, and kind of that's it. I chose a name for it to be easier to find. So let's use the shortcut to run this. And in this case, I've pressed the Alt-Shift F10. Or if you don't know which are the shortcuts that you need to press, unfortunately, they don't scale well the font in presentation mode, but it's right next to the menu item. So whenever you have a shortcut, you can choose it from there. Or again, you can just remember that you had find action, Control-Shift-A, and then say run. And well, I have this one, right? So I can choose, again, the same menu options. So I'm going to run this one. It's going to wait a bit. This one is a super slow computer, so it's like don't expect anything bigger from it. But it actually works, right? So there are some lines of preparation that we hide automatically so that they don't stand in your output. So we just collapse them. But then this is my template, right? And yeah, it seems to work okay. The exit code was 0, so everything is green. Okay, so far so good. I've shown you the editor and how it works. But I'm using the data from like hard-coded data. If I want to show you the data from a database, we need to do a bit more work. And as you probably guessed, I have a database prepared as well. If I press Alt-Home on Windows, I forgot the one on Mac, I can navigate around the project and I can start typing. So I have a DB here. It's called Postgres. So let's start with something easy, Postgres SQL, right? And I have a Postgres container, which, as you can see, it's pretty much just a few lines of code. I don't need to secure it for now, but I'm just using from the original Postgres container. I hope you can see it clearly now. Okay. Right, so it's the latest Postgres, and I just need to set up the username, password, and a database to start with. And again, if I choose the run configuration, I can just say run. And the built-in plugin for this will start showing, which unfortunately seems it doesn't really work in presentation mode. Come on, dear. Live demos. Okay, so had to disconnect from Docker, connect again, but it works. So I can see the container now. And I have a list of containers which are running. Unfortunately, this is the only one running right now. And I can see the log output of the container. I can see the properties of the container, environment variables that are set to the container and so on, any ports that are bound by the container, volumes, and so on and so forth. So there are a few properties that I can actually see. And I have some data as well, such as the uptime of the container. Okay, so that's boring. Nothing new. I can run Docker containers. So what? The configuration, actually, let me show you before we go. It's really simple. I just said, oh, I want a Docker run configuration, so not a Go build one, but a Docker one. I chose the Docker file and named the container. And what you can't see currently, because we are in presentation mode, right? And I've specified the binding port for the configuration so that I can export the required ports. And below you can actually see the commands that are going to run, or you can click on this one to actually see a nice formatted command. So if you know Docker from command line, you can understand what the IDE will try to do by going to the run configuration and seeing the command preview. So there's not much here hidden. Okay, so back to this one. I said we have a Docker, right? So if we have the Docker up and running, let's go to the databases. And I can go, I can go to the databases. here, and I can create a new database connection. So if I click on the plus sign and I say data source, I can create a Postgres connection. So let's see if this actually works today. So Postgres, and the database was GoLand, and I can test the configuration, and it works, right? So I can see that it actually worked. If you are behind some sort of SSH tunnel that you need to do, the IDE can connect to that and proxy through it. You can use SSL certificates and so on and so forth. So the database plugin is quite advanced in that regard. And you can also preview the schemas from your database. So in case you have multiple schemas, you can also choose which one do you want to have active in your project so that you actually focus on what you need. So in this case, I'm going to choose the GoLand schema, right? And I guess that's it. I just need to say, let's give it a unique name. I can leave a comment as well in case I need this, and I could also configure some parameters here, even more parameters in the advanced options. But yeah, for now it's okay to just leave that. So this one gave me a database connection. So the plugin is built in. It ships with the IDE as well. The Docker one you actually need to install. And now, well, do you see the nagging key promoter plugin here? It's actually called the key promoter X. And this dialog shows me, well, you chose the synchronize command. You press the button 4 times. Maybe you want to use the command itself, right? So this one is actually pretty useful because you can also go and customize your command, your shortcut, right? But it also gives you some hints on like how it helps you learn shortcuts. And you'll see this popping up from time to time as well. Okay, so now I should probably select the schema from this one. Okay, and let's go. I have prepared a small Postgres file here. So we have, okay, cool. So we have this one little file here, which is in the Postgres format, writing some SQL queries. And you can choose to run the query as well. And it asks you, which one do you want to run? Do you want to run the selected one? Do you want to run all of them, and so on and so forth? Just going to run the one that I need for now. Okay, and have I mentioned I'm running the nightly build? Right, give me a second to restart the IDE. There's a tiny bug which I've seen while preparing for this one, so takes a second or two to actually reload the configuration. I'm showing you how fast the IDE starts, right? That's what I wanted to do. No bug hiding or fixing at all. Okay. Okay, so I'm using this one. The IDE is back online. I don't want to go there. I want to actually go to the databases themselves. And can I have a refresh? Well, what I wanted to show you is that it actually works. And you can see the database fields and like the actual database there, but since I'm masking it too much today. Anyway, so let's insert some data in it and hope for the best. You can see that the query actually worked. So somewhere in there, my data is present. And if I run a query to actually select it, yes, I can actually see the output here. And I could actually export this one if I want to. So like there's a way to export in either SQL insert, SQL updates, HTML, and so on and so forth. So CSV files if you want. So if you need to do like a quick report on something, you can do that. Or you can view the query as well. And you can actually see the original query that you had running. Okay, so this seems to work, right? Let's go back to our tips file. And as I said, completion works everywhere, and even between restarts, the IDE will remember which files you've edited. So let's say you close the IDE like I did earlier, and you go home, and the next day you want to go back to work, you start getting into the workflow and so on, and you're like, oh man, what files did I have open yesterday? Well, I can see all of them here. So yeah, jumping back to the actual file, we can say, well, I want users, and I want to kind of read them from somewhere. So let's extract this one. And by extract, I don't mean cut and paste. I can use the refactor this option, which again, I can invoke with find action. So Control-Alt-Shift-T. And I can say, well, extract this into a variable. And I cannot do that because I have an expression. Oh, right. We are working on that as well. So I can do this. Cut and paste, always works. And I have this here, user, should probably format the fields. Right, so it works now. And let's do some connection to the actual database. And I'm not gonna bore you with all the details and so on. I'm just gonna use this, and I'm gonna use the SQLX package because I like the SQLX package more than I like the database SQL package from the built-in library. So that one is under github.com jmyron SQLX. And I might need an internet connection for this one. Do I need one? Did it actually work? So I came prepared for that as well. So the thing is, I'm running on Go modules, and to actually do that, I need an internet connection. Unfortunately, there's no internet connection here, so I have the Go mod files as a backup. So I can say, okay, require me this. And require me this as well. Oh, sure, perfect. So the IDE actually synchronized everything that's needed as a dependency, and I can go back to this one, and it's not read anymore. And I have a comment here because I always forget to actually use the database driver. So I'm adding the database driver as well, and for Postgres it's libpq that I'm using. And that's it, like source code is green now and everything is right again. So let's read the actual user. And to do that, we would use something like db.get. Let's just get the user. And let's write a query here, and let's put the ID 1. So to try the query, let's actually move this one here. Alright, so to write the query here, I would need to start writing select, right? And the IDE recognized that it's a database query that I'm trying to write because I'm using the get function on a database object. And it said, oh, well, I know that the string here, it's actually a database query string. So let's give you some help. So select star from GoLand, users, and that's where the IDE fails to actually recognize that. And, oops, sorry. Okay, where ID equals $1. So I have code completion for the SQL query as well, and if, well, the database plugin would actually work, I would have all the nice things here as well. Fortunately, it decided not to work just before the demo. Anyway, again, let's handle the error. And let's see what we do here. RRE, I said error here. Right, so I'm handling the error. And if I am to run this again, GoLand tips. Takes a while. and it actually worked, right? So to actually prove that it works, let's go and edit the template a bit, right? So TPL. Besides the ID field, we can also print the, well, I don't have any suggestion here because I don't know what type I'm trying to use, right? So how do we fix that? Well, we fix that by going to the users, pressing Alt-Enter, and we can specify the dot type. And what this means is we can actually give it a type. So using one of these comments, we can give it a type so that the ID can then parse the template correctly and help us figure out what we want to do there. So we do something like this. And it's like a normal template comment, so it's not that intrusive. But you can actually then rely on this to do, let's say, navigation for the field itself. So I can go from definition from the template straight to the definition place. So that's something that's new as well in the next version of the IDE. And I can say something like first name, and it's going to work, right? So if I run this again, well, I have an illegal syntax. Why do I have an illegal syntax? Right. Sorry about that. Right, so it actually works. So it's reading data from the database. I have completion in the template. So if you're doing any kind of front-end work or anything really that uses either HTML template or text template, you can also specify Go types now. So the types for the data that you have in the template, and you get completion options as well. You also get, for example, let's say the rename refactor, which is one of the refactoring. Like you don't need to go manually and select the field, search and replace, and so on. You can properly use the refactor itself. And let's call this one first. So I renamed this in the template, but I also renamed this in the file as well, right, in the definition place. And it's renamed everywhere. Now, obviously, it's not going to load from the database. That's a different story. So I can undo this. Right. So another thing that I can do is I've made a mess here. And there's like a lot of code that I put in the main function, right? So maybe I just want a database connection. Let's select this one, right? So let's select this one, say refactor this, and I want to use, well, it's called method, but it's really method and function. So I've took that piece of code and extracted it in its own function name. So I have create database here. And I can choose the parameter types and so on and so forth. So if you want to quickly refactor code, you now have a few options to help you quickly refactor it and not have to do too much work. And as you can see, I also have the usage place updated as well. Another thing that I do here is that I can now, let's say, so this one is passing the error variable, which is, well, not that nice, right? And if I delete this one, I'm going to get an error. Again, not that nice. So what I can do is I can invoke the refactor in this function again, and I can say change signature. So if I choose change signature here, I can see the current signature of the function with the parameters and the result parameters as well. And I can say, well, I want you to remove this. So the IDE will automatically refactor this as well. And it's just going to take one press of the button, and that's it. I don't have the parameter anymore, right? And if I change my mind, I can also undo. So after the operation is done, I can undo the usage as well of that function. So going back to this one, I have a proper function now, and well, I don't particularly like that it's a function in the main file, and maybe I want to reuse it in another file as well, in another project later on. I can choose refactor this again, so it's pretty handy. And I can say, okay, move me the identifier. So I can take that and say, well, I want you to move, not the main function, the create database one. And I want you to move it in the DB directory. Let's say DB go. in the package DB, and it complains that, well, the main function will require the create database, but if you move it in a different file, it's not going to work. So what do? Well, this one is not exported, right? So I can also export it while moving, and now the main function is happy. And I can do preview and like see all the changes that are going to be done, like the places where this is affected, right? And I can do refactor. So now I have a new function here with all the imports that are required. Unfortunately, it doesn't know how to move the database driver as well. That's a bit too much for now. So I should probably take this one as well. Right? It actually added a import statement to the new package as well, right? So I don't need to do any of those. It figured out that there's a collision between an internal DB variable or other identifier and the package that I'm having, so it decided to rename it differently, right? And if I choose, okay, go to this, I can use the same go to definition shortcut, so Control B, and I can see the folder there, and I can say, well, DB go, probably not the best name that I could give, sorry. So I can come in here and say, well, add me this one. Right, so it's going to work now, right? If I press again GoLand tips, wait a bit, so it's working again. Okay, cool. So we have the code working again, and I just performed 2 refactorings that are usually pretty important, right? So in a big project where you want to deduplicate your source code or you want to refactor it to be a bit more readable, those automated tools will help you do that. Okay, so what else do we have here? So I said that this one recognizes it automatically and so on, and that's fine, but like what would happen if I take this and I want to move this to a constant? So I can choose the refactor again, and I can say, okay, extract this as a constant because there's nothing really changing in there, right? So I can say select query, sorry. Right, so while doing that, the code got updated automatically, and even in this particular case, I can still go and see that the SQL query is injected automatically as a type. And by that, I can show you in a minute what I mean. So let's say I have this. Now, we haven't specified any particular language here, but let's say if we would have something like this. JSON output, right? And the way you would write a JSON string would be something like this. Right, and then you would have something like, well, quotes, right? So you have to put the double quotes, but then it doesn't work, and there's a whole bunch of problems there. What you can do is you can say Alt-Enter on any string that you have and say inject language or reference, and you can say JSON. So now I have JSON, and then you can say, oh, I want to edit the JSON fragment. So now I can properly see JSON here, and I can start typing. So let's say ID, 1, first name, sorry, Florin, right? So I can do all kinds of things here, and the ID knows how to automatically escape it, and so on and so forth. So I don't need to do anything special for it. And then I can choose to, well, let's say we want to share the source code with someone else that doesn't have the configuration. And this one, like the language injection is specific to my computer. I can say something like this. So language equals JSON. But let me prove that it works by going here, uninject language, right? So it's still here. Language JSON. So it's colored again as a JSON, right? So I could do the same here. I could say something like language equals SQL. So it's going to be a SQL query, but this one we detect automatically. Okay, so something else that I can show you is another type of completion that we have. Right, so I said that we have postfix completion, right? So if I go here, postfix completion, you can see all the postfix completion types. And I have the TypeScript plugin installed because we support TypeScript as well. I have the JavaScript plugin as well, but I'm interested in the Go postfix completion items. So the postfix completion is basically you can do dot after an identifier and you get all these options. So for example, you can negate a Boolean expression, put a pointer if you really want to type the name dot ampersand instead of ampersand identifier, use the append one, and so on and so forth. These are not customizable just yet for Go, but we are working on them, and at some point they will be. There is, however, something else. It's called the live templates, and you can use those. And as you can see, I have the SQL X Connect that I've used earlier, and you can define it here, and yeah, you can share it basically with yourself or anyone else on the project, and you can have it across ID projects and so on. So you don't need to repeat yourself always. And I mentioned that we have some plugins. There's one plugin that I like and I don't have activated yet. It's the rainbow brackets plugin. So if I enable this one and go, let's say, to where's my TPL file, right? So you can see there's like all the brackets and parentheses and so on and so forth are differently colored. So that makes matching them easier if you like that particularly, that in particular. So it makes things sometimes easier to understand and navigate and see like where is my curly brace closing and so on. I like it. I usually keep it on, but for presentation purposes, it's better probably to not have it on. Another thing that I can show you is, let's go to a different project. So if I go open recent, I have the CoreDump project. And what we have in 2018.3 is that we've made this button a bit more visible. We didn't used to have it, now we have it. And this one allows you to add a project to the current project, so that if you are working on multiple projects, you can see them all under the same one. Or let's say I want to go to this particular project because I actually want to show some other cool feature we've added. You probably noticed there's a opencoredump feature under run. And if I go and click on this one, so I have the history available, but basically you can select a Linux compiled binary, a coredump from Linux, and even if I'm running Windows right now or Mac OS, I can still use this feature, and I can open this one. I have the debugger output that I would normally have, and I can actually, let me make this a bit bigger. So I can actually see all the threads and so on. So this one is using the delve feature to have a look and inspect a coredump. And this one is pretty useful if you want to see what's happening in your process at a certain point in time. And you can see all the Go routines that we're running. And if I click, for example, on this one, I can see the execution points, the values that were in memory at that point, and so on and so forth. And if I go to the main function, in the main file, in this case, I can actually see, well, I was 9 at the time when I did the coredump. So not only you can do classic debugging using your own workflow, but if you get a coredump from someone, you can now inspect it and see what values were in memory at the time. So hopefully this one is going to be useful if you do any kind of advanced debugging for, let's say, problems that are hard to reproduce. One feature that I cannot show you right now because I'm running Windows, not Linux, is that we also added support for the Mozilla RR debugger, which is a reversible debugger, and that means that you can execute your program once or twice or as many times as you need until you get that hard to reproduce bug to show up. And once that happens, you can save the state and all the output and all the steps that you've done until then, and replay them as many times as you need inside the IDE. So that only works on Linux for now because Mozilla RR works only on Linux. But that will give you the ability to go back and debug very hard to catch bugs and repeat them until, well, basically you fix them. So that's one of the features that unfortunately I can't show you today. Other features, well, we have a bunch of plugins that, I don't know, like there's 1,000 plugins or so, and you can find them under the plugins section in Marketplace. And I don't have an internet connection to show you, but I have a few installed plugins. So for example, this one allows me to filter the console. I have the Terraform plugin, which allows me to write any Terraform configuration and so on. The Kubernetes plugin, so if you're running with Kubernetes, you get Kubernetes support. Give me just a second. I'm coming off from a cold, so yeah, sorry. Node.js, if you're writing that kind of language. Because I'm running on the nightly version, you could theoretically execute Node.js on a remote system, but yeah, there's that problem. Running nightly sometimes doesn't give you all the plugins. Presentation Assist I've shown you earlier, rainbow brackets. If you do any kind of remote work on different hosts, you can also get to access them using the SSH, and like you can take, for example, a file and synchronize it to a remote host as well using this plugin, the remote host access, but again, running nightly and not internet connected. SSH run as well, it's needed for the Node.js one. Right, so in about 50 minutes, I've shown you some basic editing functions, some more advanced ones. I've shown you that we support Docker, and you can actually do some interesting things with it as well. Besides Docker normal, we support Docker Compose as well. We have database support, and if I go here actually, in the in this project, what I can also show you is that we have Cassandra support, which we've added recently. So if you're using Cassandra now, you can use the same functionality from the IDE and so on. And I promise it actually works, but, well, not in nightly, apparently. Yeah, it doesn't want to work in nightly. Yay. What else? We support defining your own database driver and data source. So, for example, there's a blog post on how to connect to Amazon Athena or to Google BigQuery. So if you run those, you can connect to them from the IDE, or if you want to connect to Oracle databases, MySQL databases, and so on and so forth. We have quite a few of them. ClickHouse as well. So yeah, you can do that. We have support for Go modules. We've had that for a while now. It's working out of the box. You don't need to configure anything else to it. And yeah, kind of that's it for now. Like, there's a ton of other things. Like, I probably could spend a day talking about only the completion features and how to use them and so on. So if you are curious about the IDE, you can come to me afterwards. If you want to use these features in IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate or other editors, you can do so. However, the Go support only works either in GoLand or in IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate. And yeah, kind of that's it. We have about 5 minutes for questions if you have any. Thank you for coming and listening. Okay, so any questions? If you have, just shout, because I can't see your hands. There's too much light in here. Okay, just a second.
So you had a template, this HTML one?
Yes.
Where you had render Go type?
Yep.
Does it have to be a public one, or it can be private?
Let's see. So I change this one here. And if I go back, well, here, where's this one? So you mean for completion in here?
Yeah.
Yes, you probably need to make it public because, well, we rely on that. If you really need a feature that this one is not exported, let us know and yeah, we'll see what we can do. It's not that strict. It's actually a new feature, so that's why okay, let's see, because it's something I haven't tested yet. It didn't really cross my mind until now to actually test this.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thank you. Good question. Anyone else?
Hi. So the other day, Microsoft put achievement stuff, the gamification stuff to the Visual Studio. So, are you going to put any this kind of stuff for your products, or rather to avoid them?
So the other day I was actually really sick, so you'll have to tell me afterwards what the gamification feature is like. I haven't seen the news. What I can tell you is that if you want to do that, we have a fairly extensive documentation on how to write plugins for the IDE, and you can do pretty much anything you want from a plugin with the IDE itself. So, you know, if you want to, let's say, learn Kotlin or Java, and want to write a plugin to gamify one of the features from the IDE, you can do that. The only thing that I can come up with right now is we have under help, productivity guide, we have something that tells you how many times have you used a particular feature. So don't look at the numbers for me because I usually reset the IDE every week or so. But if you want something close to it, we have something like this that tells you, oh, you saved or you typed at least that many characters. You've never used surround with completion, so you can have a look there to see what features you're not using. So if you want to learn more features about the IDE that I haven't covered in this one, we can go here and say, oh, used, never, and then have a look, like look up by smart template, go to symbol, which is something I haven't shown you, but we can do go to symbol, and so on and so forth. So you can potentially take this data, build a plugin, and gamify. Okay. Anyone else?
There is still a chance for one more question.
Okay, come and see me afterwards if you want. Yes,
And
that's it.
big applause and big thanks for Florin.
Thank you so much.